Cowboy finds Apache mother and child on the verge of death in storm. What he did left everyone in shock. The storm had come down fast, and with a ferocity the cowboy had never seen before. The winds whipped through the trees, carrying with them the bitter chill of the mountains, and the snow fell in blinding sheets, transforming the landscape into a ghostly white wasteland. The cowboy tightened his grip on the reins of his horse, urging the animal forward through the thickening snow. His eyes squinted against the sting of the wind, the heavy snowflakes sticking to his face and coat. He had been traveling for hours, his path increasingly obscured by the growing storm. The only thing that kept him going was the promise of the woman and child he was searching for. Word had come to him that they were lost in the storm, stranded out in the mountains, their lives in danger. It was a call for help that he couldn't ignore. The cowboy had learned long ago that when someone was in need, you didn't ask questions, you answered the call. The wind howled like a wild animal, pushing him off course. The snow stung his cheeks, making his skin burn and his eyes water. He could feel his body growing tired, the cold seeping through his clothes. But he pressed on, refusing to stop. There was no time for hesitation. If he didn't find them soon, the storm would take them. His horse's hooves pounded the snow-covered ground, each step feeling like it could be their last. Hours seemed to pass as the cowboy pushed through the blizzard. The world around him had become a blur, just a swirling mass of snow and ice. He could barely see his hand in front of his face, but somehow in the middle of the storm, he spotted something, a figure, barely visible through the whiteout. His heart skipped a beat. He urged his horse forward, fighting against the snow and wind, his instincts driving him. The figure slowly came into focus, a woman hunched over, her body shaking violently from the cold. She was sitting against a massive snow-covered pine, her long dark hair tangled with snow. She looked like she hadn't moved in hours, her face pale and exhausted. Clutched in her arms was a small child, barely moving. The cowboy's breath caught in his chest as he looked at the pair, the realization hitting him hard. This was them. This was the woman and child he had been searching for. He dismounted quickly, his boots crunching loudly in the deep snow as he made his way toward them. His heart raced as he crouched beside the woman, his gloved hands reaching out to touch her shoulder. Her skin was cold and she didn't respond. He shook her gently, his voice low but urgent. "Ma'am, you need to wake up. You're not safe out here. I'll get you to shelter." Her eyes fluttered open, but they were unfocused, glazed over with exhaustion. The cowboy could see the fear in her eyes. She was weak, struggling to stay conscious, her breath shallow and ragged. He could feel the weight of the child in her arms, a small, fragile thing barely alive. The little girl's face was pale, her lips a sickly blue, and she was shivering violently. The cowboy could feel the fever burning through her skin as he gently pulled the child from her grasp, holding her close to his chest. The woman's eyes fluttered once more. "My daughter, she's so cold," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible over the wind. The cowboy nodded, his jaw tightening as he glanced around. The storm was growing worse, and the woman wasn't going to make it much longer if they stayed here. The storm was unforgiving, the temperature dropping rapidly. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to move. He took the child in his arms, cradling her carefully, her tiny body trembling violently against his chest. The woman, too weak to stand, was lifted into his arms. He could feel her weight, the coldness of her body, but he refused to stop. He urged his horse forward, his own legs straining under the weight of the woman in his arms. His breath came in heavy gasps as he pushed through the snow, his muscles burning, his mind focused only on getting them to safety. Every step felt like it could be his last, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. Time was running out, and if he didn't make it to shelter soon, they would all perish out here in the storm. As he trudged through the snow, he could feel the strength in his body slipping away. The wind howled around him, biting at his face, and the snow continued to fall in a constant barrage. His horse was struggling to keep up, the deep snow making every step a challenge. Still, the cowboy pushed forward, his body screaming in protest, but his determination stronger than ever. He had no choice. He couldn't let them die out here. And then, just as he thought he couldn't go any further, he saw it. The silhouette of a cabin, barely visible through the storm. It was distant, but it was there. His heart surged with relief. He pushed on, his eyes fixed on that beacon of hope in the distance. His horse was tired, and he himself was beginning to falter, but the cabin was close. He just had to reach it. Each step took everything he had left. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cowboy reached the cabin. He barely had the strength to open the door, but he forced it wide, stepping inside with the woman and child in his arms. The warmth hit him like a wave, and for the first time in hours he could breathe. But he didn't have time to savor the relief. He quickly moved to the hearth, placing the child and the woman by the fire. The storm still raged outside, but for the first time they were safe. The cowboy knew that his work wasn't done. He needed to get the woman and child warm. He hurried to the fire, gathering blankets, and wrapped them around the fragile figures. But his mind was still racing. The storm was still out there, and it wasn't over yet. He had to make sure they survived. As he worked quickly, he glanced at the door. The storm still howled, but now there was hope. They had made it for now. The cabin was warm, a small solace from the raging storm outside. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. The cowboy stood over the woman and child, his body aching with exhaustion. The small room was dim, but the heat from the fire seemed to seep into his bones, dulling the pain. He had barely enough strength left to stay on his feet, but he couldn't rest. Not yet. Not when they were still in danger. The woman's breath was shallow, her skin still too cold to be fully revived. The child, though wrapped in blankets, trembled from the fever that had gripped her fragile body. The cowboy knelt beside them, his heart heavy. He had done everything he could, carrying them to safety, getting them inside, keeping them warm, but the storm outside was still unforgiving. And they were not out of danger yet. Not by a long shot. He looked around the cabin, his mind racing. There was nothing else to do but wait. But he couldn't bring himself to simply stand idle. He had no medical supplies to help them, no way to ease their suffering except the fire and the warmth it offered. His fingers were numb from the cold, but he reached for the small kettle by the fire, poured hot water into a mug, and used the steam to warm his frozen hands. His thoughts were consumed by the woman and child. He kept glancing at them, hoping for any sign of improvement. Time passed in agonizing silence. The storm outside raged, and within the cabin, the warmth was slowly working its magic. The cowboy kept a watchful eye, never allowing himself to rest, knowing that any lapse in attention could cost them their lives. His mind replayed the journey, the endless hours of searching through the storm, the overwhelming exhaustion, and the sense of urgency that had driven him forward. It felt like hours before the woman's eyes finally fluttered open again, her gaze unfocused but full of relief. Her breath was still labored, but she managed to whisper hoarsely, "My daughter. Is she?" Her voice trailed off, too weak to finish. The cowboy leaned down, his voice gentle but firm. "She's safe," he said. "She's right here." His hand rested on the child's small head, ensuring that the warmth from the fire was enough to stabilize her. "You're both safe now." The woman's eyes closed again, and she let out a small sigh, her body finally surrendering to the relief of warmth. The cowboy stood, his legs shaky as he moved toward the door. He stepped outside for a moment, the wind still howling, but the storm now quieter than it had been. The cabin, though small, was a sanctuary from the fury of nature outside. He knew it wouldn't be long before the storm passed, but it had to be long enough for the woman and child to recover. The cowboy returned to the fire, kneeling beside them again, his eyes never leaving their faces. He had done everything he could. He had braved the storm to find them, carried them to safety, and kept them warm. All he could do now was wait and pray. As hours passed, the woman's breathing became steadier and the child's fever began to break. The worst of the storm was over. The snow outside was still thick, but the danger had passed. The cowboy, though drained from the ordeal, knew that this had been more than just an act of survival. He had done something no one else might have been able to do. He had saved lives, and as the fire crackled softly in the corner of the room, he allowed himself a rare moment of relief, knowing that in the face of nature's fury, he had been the one to bring hope. The storm had raged, but he had stood his ground, and that would be a story to remember for the rest of his life.